Welcome to another Tactical Civics Liberty Cast, empowering Americans to enforce the Constitution and restore liberty.
Well, tonight's going to be a fireside story. So sit you down, brother, sister, visiting friend. Sit you down. Tactical Civics is breaking up ground. It's not new ground. You're going to find this out tonight. It's very old ground. For generations, our fathers forgot to tend that ground, they didn't remember or whatever. And we can't blame them. We can't blame our fathers because they never heard these facts of our history. They didn't know to do their duty because nobody taught them. So we can't really blame them, but we just say, for the record, that for many generations, we haven't known these things, and they're very basic things. So, in our time, we're starting from a position of of astounding ignorance. You know, what can I say? We're distracted every day by stuff, by retail politics, by pop culture, busyness, sports, whatever, hobbies, work, stuff with the kids. The whirl and din of social media, we all get caught up in that, right? So if you never have time to read a book or to study real civics, criminals are going to keep getting away with what they're doing, okay? And the only thing they need is distraction. They just need to distract you, and everything else works in their favor. See how that works? So tonight, what I tell you, friend, and you may be hearing this a month or 6 months or 5 years after this recording. It doesn't matter. Stop, friend. Stop. Stop a while. Think. Tactical civics seems like a new way of thinking, a new way of believing and living and stuff. It's not. You're going to hear tonight there's a 1,400-year-old warrior tradition that gave birth to a 1,000-year-old rule of law. And that resulted in what our fathers ratified in 1789. That rule of law that's being trampled by our criminal servants today, it started 1,400 years ago under warriors. I'll show you tonight. I'll lay those ancient roots bare. I'll open it up. In future conference calls, I hope, we're going to be featuring some of the stories of some really courageous Americans, some whistleblowers, who are trying to expose very powerful, very corrupt people, men and agencies and industries. And these poor guys, gals, some of them, they don't know when they're going to be shot or poisoned or suicided by these criminals' hired thugs. Folks, there are people giving their lives to the truth right now, and I'm going to tell you why it doesn't work, but however busy you think you are, you have duties. So do I. We all have busy lives, but things are falling apart really quickly in our civilization, so we can't close our eyes to criminals in industry who are buying lapdogs in city and county and state and federal offices. It's been happening since time out of mind, but the most effective lapdogs, by the way, in that pack are the corrupt prosecutor, the corrupt judge, the corrupt sheriff, whatever, because they can just put the whistleblower away. They can just, award some insanely humongous damage claim to the bad guys. That's it. Game over. Poor whistleblower, right? Folks, that's corruption. That's how it works, throughout history, all over the world. Get it? That's how it works. We're going to cut that Gordian knot tonight. I'm going to show you, and once you hear it, you go, duh. Well, yeah, that's why our Constitution has the words in it that it has. The late Judge Antonin Scalia said, the Constitution says what it says, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. I always loved that dictum. The guy was so good. The only way to arrest this stuff, the corruption that's going on, that's taken over all levels of government, is to restore our two fundamental law enforcement institutions that are stipulated in the Constitution. So tonight I'm going to show you just how far back their provenance goes. Where does their DNA come from? Have you ever wondered how we Americans, it's really easy for us to point out corruption in any foreign government. Man, I mean, you see it right away. You can make jokes about it, whatever. You see people talking about it and online and stuff. But we don't look at our servants, from school board to sheriff's office to federal attorneys to judges, whatever, as common criminal. We don't do the same thing with our bent people as we do with, say, a Russian or a Mexican or a whatever. There's hundreds of whistleblower books that have been published just in my generation. I've told you before a bunch of times. I've mentioned this guy. His name was Donald Cressy. The late Donald Cressy now. He wrote in 1969. He published a tell-all book, big fat book called Theft of a Nation. Theft of the Nation, I think it's called. And he was explaining in that book in great detail, giving names, giving company names, giving organization, how organized crime was already saturated. Back in 1969, how organized crime had already saturated Washington, D.C. and federal and state offices from coast to coast. Folks, that was 50 years ago. And there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of similar books since that time. If nobody has a plan of action, does it really matter how many books are published about the bad guys? Is it going to matter if there's 1,000 more? If you think about it, think of the word whistleblower. I mean, that right there tells you something, right? Even the most courageous man on earth, armed with only a whistle, is like one of those British bobbies, right? The bobbies, the cops that just have a little nightstick and a whistle, right? If you face armed thugs, what good is a whistle going to do? You're blowing a whistle? That's not law enforcement, right? What do you need for law enforcement? You need grand jury and militia, right? In our system, you don't have those two things. You don't have law enforcement. You have a lot of other things that might call themselves law enforcement. You don't have constitutional law enforcement. Read the Constitution. For law enforcement, you need grand jury and you need militia. In other words, courts and firearms in the hands of the people. We have neither. Not one state in 50 has well, we do have grand juries, but they don't know what they're doing, and they're running in terrible circles and hurting themselves. I've reiterated countless times. The deep state started in the generation of Lincoln, Marx, and Darwin. A lot of people don't know those guys were contemporaries. Lincoln and Marx, they didn't live. Yeah, they lived at the same time. So did Chuck Darwin. Actual communism, the way Marx defined it in the Communist Manifesto in 1848, in America it was already in place in the administration of Woodrow Wilson 1 century ago. So the evil didn't just pop up with Clinton and Obama and Soros and stuff. This is really old, people. America's been really rotten for a really long time. Breaking every rule. We put it down in a constitution, said, this shall be the supreme law of the land. So what? If nobody obeys it, if everybody from presidents to judges just do whatever they want, it doesn't matter what that law says, does it? You need big guys with swords and an attitude. For a few centuries, America had a really blessed situation, a uniquely blessed situation. Just for 70 years or so after the Constitution was ratified, but not for very long. The internet and social media make our time the ideal time to restore that blessed, unique situation. It's still right there in our law. First, we have to repent individually. I talk about that every Sunday. Then we have to learn basic history and civics so we know what broke and we know how it broke so we can fix it. And then we get to do some exciting stuff. If people don't wimp out, that's the hard part. Let me put it another way. Before we start restoring our republic's law enforcement institutions by the people, we need to see why those institutions came to us out of the old dark and how they came to us, by whose calloused, bloody hands they came to us. This makes a really big difference. The Holy Spirit gave me this stuff, I think, or I don't know, something I ate or something this week. I'm seeing why I and the militia guys haven't gotten together so far, and why we haven't connected, and why they're not getting it, and why until they get it, we don't go anywhere. As much as I don't want to, I don't want to baby those guys, and I don't want to wait for it. Too bad. Until we get this right, we don't go anywhere. A whistle won't do it. So, some of you have my second book called Fear the People. On the cover of that book is my favorite image that we've ever come up with. I love it. I call it Oscar, my brother Oscar, and I call it the Avenging King. It's an image of a deadly serious, bloody-faced, bearded king in armor with a sharp claymore in front of him. And behind him is the first parchment page of our U.S. Constitution. He's standing in front of it like, come on, sucker, get by me. I love that picture. I always loved that my mom named me David because, from his childhood, man, David never feared man or beast. I mean, the guy, even when he was little, neither does the Avenging King. Okay, you look at that picture, and to me anyway, the guy in that image, that's the heart of every serious American that we're calling out right now to duty, that we're calling out of the couch potato Facebook crowd. There's a bunch of these guys. Why won't they come with? I don't know. Gotta get to them. We're trying to put in the record tonight. We're trying to give them a big fat rope to grab onto and see. There's something they have that if we don't have, until we get it, we don't go anywhere. They've got to come with us, so we got to get together on this. I'm not suggesting that right now the militia guys agree with our tactical civic way of doing things. They don't, because they haven't even seriously looked at it, because they like to play soldier and have barbecues while they talk smack, but never actually confront bad guys. That's what they like to do. And I don't care what they say to me or do to me. And when I ask them, they can't really explain who they would start shooting or why they would start shooting or what they would do the day after and the month after, what the shooting stops. They can't explain any of that. That's why I say play soldier, because they're not serious. They haven't thought about consequences. They haven't thought about why they're just having fun. They want to have fun. Guys just want to have fun. They want to go out and play soldier and burn some meat, and drink some beer, and have a good time. Full battle rattle, have fun, play soldier. They're not serious. No matter what cool patch they wear or how bad they can talk smack, heck, any gang member can do that. They're not serious yet. When they're serious, we want them. We want that brother on our side. I can show them why we got to have them on our side. There's stuff to do. And Trump doesn't know how to do it. And all of Trump's men don't know how to do it. And they can't because they don't have the law. They're in the wrong office, see? I'll get to that in a minute. But that's why I mentioned the Avenging King on the cover of my book, Fear the People, because that Avenging King is how I see our buddies in the 3% Army. I see the hearts of those guys, and I get it, but they don't get our heart. They don't get our teaching because they don't want to look at it, and they don't want to read, and they don't want to learn, and they don't want to do squat, except have fun. Kick ass, hoorah! They're not going to get it, guy. But I'm going to show you why that's still super important. You need both. For years, I've been looking for one man among all those guys who can call them to duty. We have yet to find that, but we've found several that we thought would work. No, it fell by the boards. God's going to send that man in his perfect timing, and all of his decrees will out, always. But tonight, I'm going to take you into the old dark of our past so we can start understanding men of action, men of blood, men whose hearts yearn to do the right thing by the warrior's code. Those old ancient warriors changed the world. God ordains everything in his universe, everything in his universe. He's eternal, he's all-powerful. He's more fearsome to his enemies than Odin ever dreamed of being. Odin wasn't a real god. From Scripture, you can see it. From law enforcement, you can see it. Fear is the best motivator. When love fails, when logic fails, fear works. So, tonight we're doing Old Norse mythology. And if you're wondering what ancient pagans have to do with our grand jury and militias and rule of law, I'm getting there. Promise. Oh, by the way, did you know that our word Sunday comes from the Old Norse day of the sun? Monday was the day of the moon goddess. Tuesday was for the Norse god Tiu. Wednesday was for their god Woden. Woden was another name for Odin. Thursday was Thor's day. Friday was for their goddess Freyja, and Saturday was Saturn's day. Isn't that weird? God ordains this stuff, folks. Our days of the week, they're old pagan deities. And guess what? All of those pagan deities are doing God's bidding. Now, I don't have time tonight to survey the whole, ancient world of the Angles and the Saxons and the Alemanni and the Norsemen and Goths and all of them. Here's just some real basics. Odin was their deity. He sat in a big hall called Valhalla, kind of like a big beer hall, mead hall. Half the warriors that died in battle, they went to Valhalla. And the other half went to join the goddess Freyja, who presided over a place called Folkvanger. And the Valkyries were these heavenly women who got to choose whether you were going to go to Odin or to Freyja during, for Ragnarok. Ragnarok was the end of time. So these Germanic pagans, real bloody folk, they were the precursors to the Vikings. And when it really came down to it, they were just simple people. They were pragmatists. Whatever worked, that's what they did. That's what they tried. If Odin failed, you could try praying to Jesus for once. Why not? Try it. They didn't call him Jesus. I'll get to that in a minute. If you were one of these old guys, or gals, you never knew which god might come through. You had a lot of gods. So, By the way, don't laugh at them, folks, because if you do a quick survey, go online, go to wherever, Wikipedia or any number of online resources, survey the teachings of popes and primates and bishops and stuff during those times, you're going to find some bizarre stuff. So don't laugh at the old Vikings and pre-Vikings. You've seen fake swordsmanship in movies, right? Real swordsmanship is the real thing. It's, stuff gets chopped off. Guts get laid open. Arms get chopped off. Heads get chopped off. Not like a bunch of Muslim jihadists. I mean, we're talking, go to Romans 13. Notice, God designs it so bad guys are going to fear good guys who have the lawful power of the sword, right? A sword, man, that's rough. That's rough. You do bad, it's going to hurt. Your head might roll. I mean, literally, your head might roll. That's not a pretty sight. Today's militiaman, he plays right now because he doesn't know what he's doing. He's an unprepared, worthy tribesman of our ancient rule of law. He has in his gut what we need. He just hasn't gotten to the law part because it's boring to him. But what I'm trying to get at here is precisely because he's stubborn and because he's warlike, he's a valuable friend, he's a valuable person on our team for what's coming, even if we don't see eye to eye yet. Yesterday, I just finished uploading to Amazon book 2 out of our 7-volume Tactical Civics booklet series. Book 2, it's called Mission to America, on which I'll say a little more in a minute. Book 3 is about the America Again indictment engine. Book 4 is entitled The Grand Imperative, and it's all about where the grand jury came from and how the bad guys almost killed the grand jury in our country at one time, and how the federal courts misinform and strip citizens of their real power, their real authority over the law, so that the bad guys in robes or the bad guys who work in federal attorneys' offices can just keep running the tables. And there's no power above them. I mean, face it. They run the table. They do whatever they want for the bad guys. They work for the bad guys. Yeah, that happens every day in this country. So in the last part of that little booklet, I walked the reader through our plan. Okay, so it's the bad news. Here's what's happened to the grand jury. How do you restore the state grand jury? Remember, state court is higher than federal court. We've talked about that many times. State court is where criminal cases are supposed to reside in American law. State courts are where all the fun's going to be. If you like that kind of fun, that's where the action's going to be, okay? In future years and generations, folks, it's coming. The states will be given their authority, their power back. But You got to do it first. The people have to do it first. When we, the people, start making Romans 13 very real to bad guys who work in public employment, that's when you're going to see things happening. Won't take us long to get there. We've got to start. Then book 5 is entitled The Missing Piece, P-E-A-C-E, play on words. The Missing Piece, because peace really is missing all across this country. And that booklet explains the roots and the legal purpose of the constitutional militia, the second half of this thing we're talking about. So this fireside time tonight is where I'm explaining the common ancient matrix in the Latin womb of both of these institutions. If you don't see the grand jury and the militia together, then you're not seeing either one in its proper application in our lives today. If we can't deploy them together, we may well not deploy either. Without guns, grand jury's not going to fix the bad cop, the bad judge, the bad attorney, federal attorney or state's attorney. You're not going to get that guy unless you got guns. And you can't just run in there with guns if you don't have the law. So you've got to have the grand jury. So both of them need the other. The two institutions go together, and I show you from the dooms of Ethelred 1,000 years ago where this comes from. It's old. The ancient warrior culture, it started in European countries, right? But it can't achieve what we can achieve here. I mean, the first true popular sovereignty, real, what does popular sovereignty mean? The people are sovereign. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We, the people ourselves, get to bring down a crooked federal judge or attorney or mayor or whatever, sheriff, governor, state or federal legislator. We get to bring them down. If they're crooked, we get to bring, guess who else can bring them down? Nobody. See, popular sovereignty has a sword. After generations of government school programming, the needy, dependent people within the populations of California and Colorado, Illinois, Massachusetts, who else? New Mexico, Oregon, Vermont. They want to live in a, quote, sanctuary state. You know what that means? There's no law here. We can break the law wholesale. Our government's breaking the law. We can start handing out stuff to everybody. You can be from Mars. You come, you have your hand out, sure, sure. Let the taxpayer, sure, the people that are still working, we're going to put it all on their back. There's no law here. We're a sanctuary from law. California, Colorado, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Mexico, Oregon, and Vermont. No law. If the men of those states had already restored their grand jury and their militia, think about it. Those wouldn't be sanctuary states today, following the stupid European Union. They wouldn't be. Instead, you'd have some very crooked state officials in their state pen with all their assets seized. That is righteousness. That's Romans 13 at work in the American legal context. That's getting her done. Do you hear that, militiamen? You're my brother and you refuse to work the right way. And until you do, we don't go anywhere, see? Like the stiff-necked children of Israel, or those of you who read Scripture, 1 Samuel 8, you know. Samuel's trying to talk them out of, no, they want a king. You don't want a king because here's why. He's going to take this and that. No, 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 but we want a king over us. Everybody else has a king over them. Yeah, we want a king. That's Europe. That's the European people forever. And that's too many people in the states that I just mentioned, and including here in Texas, my wonderful, beloved state. A lot of people want stuff handed to them. They're dependent. They've lost all connection to the ancient rules of, you know, this is right and this is wrong. Look, you don't do work, you don't eat, buddy. That's biblical. The roots of law enforcement that we're considering tonight, it just has to do with, hey, you know, good and evil, right and wrong. You refuse to give up the sow-tit government, you know, kings providing for your poor little, you know, for your little subject. You're not an American. You don't belong here. I'm sorry, go somewhere else. It's not the way it's supposed to work here. Do you see how things break down when you try to make it that way? Girly men with your pretty man bun, with your earrings, with your nose ring, whatever. You younger ones, there's millions of you. Man, you're pathetic. I don't know what's going to happen to you as you get older, but wow, when your mom and dad kick you out of the basement, hard knocks coming, buddy. And the older girly men, They might look more normal. They're still communists. They're still trying to feed off of somebody else. Irresponsibility is the default position for serfs in any monarchy, in any dictatorship, in any communist system. That's the default position. You just sit back. Oh, the government will do it. Then you find out the government doesn't have it. The government's not doing much at all. Go spend a week in Venezuela. The bureaucrats that pass out the bread and the coins, they end up with all the extra bread and lots of coin for themselves. See, it's all downhill from there. See how that works? I mean, this isn't rocket science. I've reiterated many times, Washington, D.C. and most state governments have been communist by Marx's definition since Woodrow Wilson's time. And my point tonight is that in a proto-Viking warrior culture, if you were a king, you always had to watch your back. Why? Because if any group of warriors smelt a rat wearing a crown helmet, you weren't going to make it through the night, king. Those guys knew. They knew how to take care of business. Right and wrong. It's just right and wrong. That's what I see in today's American warrior culture. The brothers are potentially able to get her done, but doggone it, I can't get them to read. Maybe they'll listen to this. I don't know. One thing you see in history, repeatedly you see it. All over you see it. If it's not done, I'm talking about right and wrong, justice and all. If it's not done for Jesus Christ, it turns bad. It turns bad every time. It has to be real law enforcement. It can't be vigilante lawlessness. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Even if you're just as passionate or whatever, if you're working outside the law, guess what, dude? It's not going to work. When the gospel of Jesus Christ came into the old dark of Norse and Saxon and Germanic Goth tribesmen, that is the DNA of our Constitution. We hear all the time, our team does, that the tactical civics is real detailed, it's hard to understand. Yeah, it is. It is. There's no getting around it. We live in the most complex, largest economy in history. Give me a break. Our servants are supposed to be operating by the most magnificent, oldest surviving constitution in human history. It's not easy. A lot of stuff, details, moving parts. So fixing all of that when it's this far gone, it's not going to be quick and it's not going to be easy. Get over that. That's why we always say this is a new way of life. It's going to take generations to really establish it. By the time you and I are dead of old age, we'll get a start. We'll lay down all of the, the base. We might not lay down all of the paving over the base. We're going to do what we can do. Whatever God gives us strength and life to do, that's how far we're going to get. Maybe we'll go a lot further than I think. We could have all this done in 20 years. I don't know. But that's why I'm breaking it down into small books and blog articles and videos. And all of us, our team, we're trying to make things as digestible as we can. But you can't be a baby about things. There's work to be done, folks. We're starting local chapters so you can start meeting and holding cool, fun, fellowships and stuff. Heck, hold barbecues, do the full battle rattle, play soldier, do whatever, but do this stuff. Start learning why in the hell things haven't been working. Well, because you're not even reading the basics. Because our fathers lost this for so long. It's going to take years to learn it back. You can't rush this. This is where we came from Calvary's cross under Roman rule. That's a long time ago, folks. And you say, well, I don't like history. I don't want to learn all that stuff. I just want, well, hey, you know what? You're never going to know. How can you get back where we're supposed to be if you don't know where we came from? So like I said, book 2 of the Tactical Civics series is called Mission to America. It's designed to be a crash course in this stuff, in tactical civics. 7-week for our local chapters to use. And you don't have to have a tactical civics chapter to use the book. I mean, you can do the 7-week course or 7-lesson course in 1 week. The second lesson in that book is called Applying Romans 13. And that's where I explain. When Paul is telling the Christians in Rome to obey the higher authority over them, you need to know civics here in America. I'm not talking to Spaniards here. If a Frenchman or Italian or, Afghan or Mexican or whatever, an Indian, even an Egyptian reads Romans 13 about obeying government, you think he's ever going to end up where we have to end up? course not. Every country has a system of government and law of some kind. In our system of government, read the Constitution. Who is the highest authority that God ordains to bear the sword? Who? Read the Constitution. First three words. We are. We are. So our forefathers forged that sword that God ordained for us to bear, for we, the people, ourselves to bear. Now that's basically English, and I'm showing you, and I will show you here in the next 10 minutes, it's English, those folkways and that law, and they're German, those folkways and that law, and they're Swedish, and they're Norwegian, and this comes from the old dark. And yet, those ancient warriors made grand juries, and they made militias, believe it or not, and they didn't let crooks off the hook. They would never have put up with this modern world where the crooks have all the stuff. Let me say again, whistleblowers, Constitution appreciation classes, books, I don't care what the book is about, landslide elections, they're never going to end this nightmare, folks. None of that stuff will ever end this stuff. None of those things is law enforcement. We need warriors running point, kicking ass, intimidating the hell out of evil men that have soft hands but bent hearts, and they know how to hire other evil men who hurt and kill people who try to publicly expose their crimes. Folks, this happens a lot. And even though fighting the wrong way, maybe sometimes it's worse than not fighting at all, I still respect, I still honor the men and women who did their best by the lights they had, who lost everything, sometimes lost their lives, doing the best they could by the lights they had. I honor those men and women. I respect them. The roots of our grand jury, of our militia, are more magnificent, more ancient, more honorable than anything Hollywood could ever dream of. You need to know this so our plan of action in your heart has the legitimacy of the beginnings of our civilization, so that our civilizational memory holds together from the first to the last, so that we see why, the why. The why is always the important part. And maybe someday your kids or your grandkids, or I don't know, maybe they'll hear this podcast or something. And if so, my prayer is that they'll teach it to their kids and grandkids. Maybe after tactical civics has become a comfortable way of life or something. When a young child asks, but why? We should be able to satisfy that child. Give them solid footing. And then they'll just nod and say, okay, I get it. All right, 1,200 years of history in 10 minutes. 264 A.D. There was a Greek couple in Cappadocia. They were enslaved by Goth warriors. It happened all the time. And carried off to what's now northern Bulgaria. And they named their kid, their first son, they named him Wulfila. That's just Gothic for little wolf. So Wulfila became a scop. S-C-O-P, scop. A scop was a bard, a teller of poems, a singer of epics. In that world, world lit only by fire, by the grace of God, by some real clever syncretism by Wulfila, a lot of warriors came to Christ because he put the story of Jesus to those Goth warriors in a way that they wouldn't reject. Okay, let's jump ahead over, 5 centuries. Orality, telling story, always telling stories by the fire, became literacy, right? People started writing more and more, at least learned people did. In 835 A.D., there was an East Saxon. We don't have his name. It hasn't come to us down through history. He was another scop, tale teller, singer of epics. He synthesized all the 4 Gospels into one written text. And large parts of that text are still found today in museums. We know this is all factual. It was given the name the Heiland, or Savior. Either Heiland, H-E-I-L-A-N-D, or Heliand, H-E-L-I-A-N-D, depending on which culture you were in. But Heiland, kind of like saying Highland, meant Savior. So that was Christ. He was the Heiland. And this thing was written, the Heiland was written in kind of the the long run-on saga style of kind of like Beowulf. If you had to read Beowulf for school, it's a real famous epic poem, super long, super interesting. Well, Beowulf was like almost a century after the Heyland. Okay, so the Heyland is an early epic poem, very long, was meant to be read by the fire at night, night after night after night, and it would keep people coming back for more, just like, you know, TV shows do now. Here's what I've been coming to. For you who are militiamen listening to this, either tonight or after the fact, in the Heyland, Christ is portrayed like a warrior chieftain. That's the way he was shown. It wasn't like what you read in the actual, you know, Gospels. His disciples were warrior thanes. Okay, that's just what this East Saxon decided to do, and it was really smart. A lot of the imagery, you know, of Jesus came from the images that they had of Odin. And if you know anything about Odin, also sacrificed himself to achieve wisdom, to achieve power, whatever. C.S. Lewis once said that all the ancient religious sagas, wherever they come from, they came from the same struggle of God's creatures, created mankind, trying to recall, think back to the same old story in the heavens, to the same old story in the deep whale roads, like Beowulf called the whale roads. I love that imagery. There's no road down there, but the whales know it. They tried to go way back since the beginning and know, where did this come from? So that's what the writer of the Heyland did. He used the imagery. He used, he made Jesus more powerful than Odin, because Odin will die in Ragnarok. Ragnarok was the sort of the last day, and so in the Ragnarok, Odin dies, but Jesus lives forever. So throughout this, throughout the Heyland, the author, he changed all the scenery, the flora and fauna and stuff, the mountains, the weather, all the stuff, not like what you read in the actual Gospels. Even the social structure of the New Testament, even some of the moral standards of early Christianity, he changed them so that these rough Germanic tribesmen wouldn't, oh, you stupid little baby girl, so they wouldn't walk away. He wanted to keep their interest. And the young men, too. The young men was the same. They would look at Dad and, young boys, and they like tough stuff, So that's what the Heyland does. The Heyland this is the Savior, but in a way you've never seen him before. Well, it worked. It worked thousands and thousands of times. Those oral stories that Wulfila had done, when you make the epic poem, the written poem, fit the way these people live, bingo, they got it. Okay, that I can go with. That's what I'm trying to do with you, militiamen. Hear me, brother. Hear me. Of course, it helped back then. They won over a lot of Germanic and Saxon warriors because those epic poems were backed up by massive military force of Emperor Charlemagne. So that kind of made a difference too. So that's the oldest roots of our past for the benefit of those of you who will serve in Grand Jury, and I hope that's all of us, eventually, sometime in your life. Those who will serve in militia, and I hope that's most of us. We're seeking to restore these things. We have to restore these things. Now, what's the original wellspring of our law, of the Constitution itself? I want to go through that part so you see kind of, the DNA code of this document. A lot of times you've heard me mention this guy, King Ethelred, the first Christian king on the island of England and Scotland and Wales, the United Kingdom, who established a rule of law that we can trace that DNA back. We could say, okay, in our Declaration of Independence, in our U.S. Constitution, we can go back, and I'm going to show you right now, and you get all the way back to the dooms of Ethelred, the ancient law code of King Ethelred. I wanted to show you the Germanic and Saxon warriors, because without them, Emperor Charlemagne helped by tweaking them, by pushing them, by, in some cases, putting them in chains, chopping off their heads. If we had not had those old warriors keeping things right in their time, the dooms of Ethelred would not have made the impact that they did. As they closed the 10th century, Those dooms made all the sense in the world because of what had happened since time out of mind for generations before. And then Sweyn Forkbeard, usurper king, came with his mighty men across the northern ocean, drove Ethelred into exile. The Ethelred ended up skipping. He ran off to the continent. And then Sweyn dies suddenly. Sweyn Forkbeard died. When that happened, the Saxon people started freaking out. They said, whoa, we kind of really want Ethelred back. He wasn't so bad. So in 1014 AD, they offer Ethelred his crown back, but they say, and this is a really important part, you'll get your crown back, come on back, only if you agree to these demands. Here it is in writing. That had never happened before. In the history of man on earth, you never had, so these Saxon warrior leaders were thinking about it, what they had done before. This time they put it all in writing and said, you want to be our king? Here's the deal. And they knew, Ethelred knew how to rule. He was a good ruler. He was godly and he was pretty fair, but he liked to tax heavy and he liked to live large. And so the Saxon warriors say, wait a minute. Let's set some conditions here. We're going to let him come back to the island, but folks, this had never been done. Humans had never thought of that before. And that compact, the Compact of Ethelred, 1014 AD, 1,004 years ago, was the people's rule for a king to obey. And despite what my dear sister Chris Ann Hall teaches about Magna Carta and stuff, this is the actual embryo of our rule of law. Not Magna Carta, Compact of Ethelred. For the first time, a king could not do as he pleased. If you read it, it was all rooted in Christian tenets. So it worked for Ethelred. See, Ethelred was a Christian guy. That was his Christian ethic. They held him to his ethic. They said, hey, you're a Christian guy. Next came the Charter of Liberties. It was about a century after, 1100 AD, exactly 1100. Same Christian basis. Then came Magna Carta, that Chris Ann Hall says was the beginning. And that was about a century after. That was in 1215 AD, in the Valley of Runnymede in England. Then the English people drafted the provisions of Oxford in 1258. And then 2 generations later, the Declaration of Arbroath. That was in 1320. In all of these documents, these were laws. There's as much a law as anything you know today. God had to be honored and obeyed. And very importantly, kings had to honor and respect the people while the people agreed to be ruled by the king. See, it wasn't like you think. It was a two-way street. So things were going really, boy, they looked like they were going in just a really good direction. And then comes the Black Plague, bubonic plague. Those little fleas coming off of those rats, swept like wildfire, started in Mongolia in 1340, ended up 6 years later in Western Europe, killed almost 1/3 of the world's population. Imagine that. So the world saw a hopeless, confused, really lawless time. For generations it was bad, really bad. A lot of dead people. Every family, some families were completely wiped out. The invention of the movable type printing press came with the next big thing to change the world, swung the pendulum the other way. We had all this lawlessness, all the death, all the lack of direction. Now the pendulum swings the other way because mankind starts zooming ahead in knowledge. Nobody had books. You couldn't afford a book. Most families never saw a book. Now you could afford a book. You could learn things. So law was kind of remaining pretty medieval, pretty heavy-handed, but it was this incunabulum, they called it, kind of a nest, kind of a birthplace of knowledge, the first 1,000 printing presses throughout Europe. And it changed everything about how humanity carried on. After the Black Plague, it all started coming back. Finally, there was a small group of Puritans, left England. First they went to Holland, then they cut across the Whale Road, across the trackless Atlantic. They were going to take their chances in America. They got here, and with them they brought this ancient rule of law. In their hearts they had all of this, and they forged the Mayflower Compact in 1620. The ancient common law of England, of the early Saxons, with roots in these ancient Norse and Gothic ethics, in a very distilled form. Now it was on American soil. 8 years after the Mayflower Compact over here, at the end of the 30 Years' War, I won't get into that, big deal. The English kinfolk over there across the Atlantic passed a thing called the Petition of Right. in 1628. Same deal. King Charles couldn't infringe on the stipulated rights of the people. If he did, watch out. Then came the Grand Remonstrance. That was in 1641. And then the English Bill of Rights. Real big deal, 1689. Boom, boom. Now you had this House of Commons, the warrior class, you know, the merchant, the working man class, whatever, being held back by the House of Lords, kind of an offset. But rule of law still kept kings in their place as much as it was keeping the people in their place. See? Very different from what the world had known before. Then it was our turn, we Americans. Like I said, 1620 it started, but a lot of hardship. Lot of hardship. We learned everything the hard way here. We had no breaks. Everything was uphill. Commonly, people lost everything. To the elements, to the Indians, to the animals. It was hard. After all that work, faraway king, who this time he couldn't reach his subject. I mean, he had to cross a whole ocean if he wanted to reach his subject. That king started kicking against the American people's law, and in 1776, as much as any of the preceding declarations and compacts that I've shown you from the 762 years prior, this was a law. The Declaration of Independence in 1776, yeah, it was an indictment of King George III and the British Parliament. Yeah, it was law set out before the world's court of public opinion. That's what it was. It was going to be enforced by armed ministers of the rule of law in America. Every yeoman who had a flintlock or a pitchfork. We all know how that turned out. America never looked back. England never looked forward. Again, you know, back to its glory days. Never. Then came the Articles of Confederation, 1781. 13 new little countries, you know, at that time. They were like countries, the states. When right after the war, each state had its own peace treaty signed by George III. It were 13 countries, each with its own government and constitution. They banded together for a federation, you know, a confederation. And when that proved to have too many practical weaknesses, a lot of stuff wasn't thought of, wasn't worked out. The states convened delegates in Philadelphia, and we know how that worked out. 4 months later, a lot of discussion, some of it reasoned, some of it very heated, scholarly. The Constitution for the United States was born. There it is, 10 centuries of Western rule of law in, took me more than 10 minutes. I've reiterated a lot of times, we stipulate in our law that we, the people, are sovereign over it to defend it. It's in there in writing, we stipulate it. Okay? So now you see why, from the standpoint of the rule of law, you see why I love that picture, that image of the avenging king. Because that's us. I don't care if you're a 22-year-old woman. I don't care if you're a 79-year-old man. I don't care if you're an 86-year-old woman. You have as much ability to be that avenging king in league with others. I'm not talking about us individually. I'm talking corporately. When you serve on that grand jury, there is no higher power in the courthouse. Not the judge, not the prosecutor, no one. In law in America, you're the top. You see why you don't want to skip out? If you get called to a grand jury, please serve. Do you see why you want to join your militia and start learning this stuff? Grand jury won't do any good without you, without the militia. It's not going to work. So folks, we have work to do. I'm sorry, I've taken a whole hour, but this is stuff we had to put in the can. This lesson, this fireside chat here, it had to go in the can because you have to see this. You have to know it. Your kids have to know it. We'll show you what to do. We'll show you how this works. We'll show you how to do this stuff. But you have to take responsibility. You, every American. I don't care if you're not able-bodied. If you're able-minded, you can do it. There's work to be done. Join us. And you, gentlemen, if you're trying and trying to get your militia group going, and you're kicking against the goads of history and against law and everything else, but you have all the good stuff, the cool armory, you wear the rattle, it's all there. Look, dude, you're not doing anything. Come on. Join us.
To learn more about this subject, and more on our blog and Facebook group, and to take action in your county, go to tacticalcivics.com.